What I love most about your story and what I've learned the most about your story is that it's not just about what we go through, but it's more so about how we go through it and how
Right.
we choose to go through things,
Hmm.
where we all have a choice for how we want to deal with the challenges that come into our life. And it's not just the challenge itself that we have to deal with.
Mm.
And I believe that a story is most powerful and authentic when it's shared directly by the person who's experienced that story. And
Right.
you've talked about how your story has been told many times by other people, whether it's police reports, judges, lawyers. What do you think other people wanted the narrative for your story and your life to be?
That's a great question. I've never been asked that question quite like that. It's hard for me to like really say. I think maybe depending on who was telling it, uh, they maybe wanted the story to be of this violent black boy who uh, needed to be locked up. You know, there was a term in the '90s that came out called super predator that turned out to not be factual or true. But at the time, that scare tactic was used to paint young juveniles growing up in America uh, who were committing crime as like this wave of just like terrorist kids who were just had no value of life, human life, and we're gonna something had to be done to rid society of them. Um, so I think that's one story that people would like wanted to tell and frame me in. Uh, also, then there was the media uh, stories that came out over the years of different people telling my story. Uh, there was a story about the victim and how she framed certain narratives. One narrative that I'm glad that she framed, at least in interviews, was that she forgave me for what I did. And so, yeah, um, those are a couple of theories that come to mind.
What was your introduction like to street life and gang life when you were growing up in Central Park Village in Tampa, Florida?
I think I learned about street life initially from my older brother, Sean, whose nickname was John John. He was someone I actually idolized as a kid because of the respect that he had both in my neighborhood and other violent neighborhoods throughout the city of Tampa. So I wanted that respect for myself, and I thought, I guess, foolishly, that the way to get it was through committing crimes. Um, so growing up in Central Park Village was a very difficult experience, but I didn't realize it was difficult at the time because it's all I actually knew. Um, but there were days and nights, particularly nights, where there was shooting, and my mother would tell like lay with me on the floor in case case bullets came through our windows. They never did, but she was always like cautious. And I just noticed that you know later on in life that that's not the way like middle class America lived their lives. It was a huge difference for people um, growing up in middle class America, and I knew that, and I found out this because I got a job at the YMCA. The president of the YMCA, Bob Gilbertson, and he used to let me hang out with his family on the weekends, and it was like night and day in comparison to my world versus where he and his children lived.
Yeah, you say in your book that you were forced to conform to the unforgiving code of the streets. How much
Right.
of street life for you was feeling like you had to conform to this way of life because that's all you knew rather than simply being like, this is what I want to do?
Oh wow, good question. I think a huge percentage. I wouldn't say how much because I don't know, but a huge percentage was me wanting to conform to street life, so that I wouldn't be seen as soft, that I wouldn't be seen as a pushover. However, I always had higher ambitions. I had ambitions to be somebody, whether that was in sports or the entertainment world. I was very intrigued by both Michael Jordan and Michael Jackson. So, and I was very good at performing, and I was very good at sports. And so I always thought that one of those two things would be my way out of the hood. But that was so far in the future that I kind of got wrapped up in the present as a kid, you know, and the present, I had to conform to my environment for the most part. But there will always be slight tugs at my heart to do other things, such as go downtown at age 10 or 11 and look for a job. Uh, I remember my friend Ronald McClendon, who I encouraged to go downtown with me to look for a job. I remember him saying, "Who's going to hire us? Like, we're too young. Like, who's going to give us a job?" I said, "Just let me do all the talking." And we ended up getting not only getting a job, but meeting a guy that became like a lifelong father figure to me, and Bob Gilbertson.
Speaking of that family system, you didn't have the strongest nuclear family support around you. Do
Right.
you think if you did have that, do you think you would have been able to stay out of street life, or do you think it was inevitable just given the environment that you were living in?
I definitely I definitely believe not having a father figure in my life severely impacted my development as a boy and a man. Um, Without a consistent father, male role model to look up to and guide, I had to. I mean, and I'm learning this now as I like go through therapy and self reflection. Like I adopted a lot of my mother's ways. You know, women are very emotional, and I think just being raised in a single parent female household kind of negatively impacted me. It made me too sensitive. For one thing, uh, like take every slight like it was a knife in my chest. Uh, yeah, so the family destructive family dynamic that I grew up in definitely impacted my life, and I do believe had I had a stronger nucleus, uh, that maybe I wouldn't have ventured into a life of crime, at least not so early. It's hugely possible that because you got to realize I started getting in trouble and like arrested in sixth grade. I never even made it to the eighth grade. You know, before I was incarcerated in an adult system. So I truly just to answer your question, I believe had I had a dad, um, it would have been things would have been different.
How impactful was your grandmother on your childhood?
Huh. Yeah, I was raised by women. My grandmother Linda was probably the most pivotal figure outside of my mother um, in my life, and in many ways, she played a more important role than my mother. I mean, my mother gave me life, but my grandmother Linda, she she valued me, man. Like I was like my name Ian means gift from God, and she valued me like I was literally a gift from God. Um, her impact on my life is immeasurable. Grandma Linda just treasured me, and I've never had it kind of affected me because, you know, it's awkward because I'm used to that treatment from her, but when people try to get too close to me and like this shining light or whatever, this aura that I'm told I have about myself, I kind of like push people back because I don't like people to get too close to me. But Grandma Linda's impact on my life was remarkable. Just the way she loved me, man.
You
Yeah,
just said something interesting there about people saying you have this aura about you. What do
yeah.
you think that aura is?
Wow. So that's a great question because many people go through life and not discover what their gifts are. I think each and every one of us is born with a gift. Some of us have more than others. I believe one of my gifts is the ability to compose words in ways that move people. I discovered that gift at an early age, and I nurtured it in solitary confinement. Um, but as far as my aura,
The one thing I would say is, and this might help with an aura, is that I would probably say that the stronger the aura, it can't be put into words. It can only be felt when you're in the presence of it.
thank you for thank you for helping me out because uh yeah, I can't quite put a finger on it. Like, and this isn't something new. This is something I've heard in different ways all my life, or people have shown me all my life. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's spiritual, man, and I'm so thankful that God or the universe chose me as a vessel to be that light that people feel that way about.
Yeah. And I would say that what you've experienced in your life is obviously a massive reason for how that aura has been built in where you are now.
Right.
So, getting into the start of that journey for how that aura was built, walk me through the events leading up to shooting Debbie Bakery.
Um, yeah, I've told this story so many times that it never gets old though, because when you look back on traumatic events, you always think, well, if I didn't do that, then that wouldn't have happened. But if I never did that, then the good parts wouldn't have happened either, right? So you just look at it like it was meant to be. But I just remember being young, 13, sitting on my girlfriend's porch, trying to convince her to go upstairs with me. And she was resistant towards it, saying that last time we went upstairs that I told my mother and my mother told her mother, so she didn't feel like she could trust me, and so she wasn't going upstairs with me. And I just was like so frustrated. And I remember like just trying to continuously convince her, like, no, I had to tell my mom that where I was that night because it was past my curfew. I had like 11 o'clock curfew or something like that, which is crazy for a 13-year-old child, have 11 o'clock curfew. If I ever have kids, I think they should be in the house way before 11 o'clock at night. But anyway, she never went go. She didn't want to go upstairs, and so while I'm sitting on the porch with her, I would see my friends and a few of my friends in the neighborhood would stop by, see me on the porch, and hey, Ian, let's go to the game room. I'm like, nah, I'm good. I'm chilling with my girl. Or hey, Ian, let's go to the park. I'm like, nah, not today. Maybe tomorrow. I'm chilling with my girl. But after like an hour or two had gone by, and she still hadn't budged on her decision to go upstairs with me, a final friend approached the front porch and asked me to go, like he pulled me off the porch and says, Ian, I got a gun. Let's go do some jacking. Jacking back then was the street terminology for committing a robbery. And I remember looking back at her and saying, yeah, I might as well, because there's nothing going on here. Throughout the years, and so we left and hooked up with two other guys, and we proceeded to go downtown to commit a robbery. But throughout the years, I look back at myself when like looking at myself leave that porch, and I would say things like to myself, just talking to myself in my conscience, like, why did I leave? Like, I turned everybody else down. Why didn't I turn the guy with the gun down? You know? But, it's hindsight is 2020. We went downtown, and they gave me the gun. I was the youngest guy. I was the youngest out of everybody. It was four of us. It was a guy 18 or 19 or older, because this was the first time I ever met the guy. Another guy named Keith, he was 16, and my friend Marquise, who gave me the gun, he was 14. I was the youngest. And so they kept trying to convince me to commit a robbery in the broad open, and I kept turning them down. Like, so many people got saved that night based on me saying no. And by this time, like, an hour or two had passed, and we still hadn't found anybody to rob, because I kept turning everybody down that they pointed out, turning them down. And the person with the gun has the power, like the final decision of who we're gonna rob. So by this time, the whole group was frustrated, and I remember us sitting down on like a curve, and the older guy said, Ian, if you're scared, give the gun to somebody else. Give the gun to Marquise. So I gave the gun to Marquise, who was sitting next to me on the curb. He passed the gun to his cousin, Keith, and he passed the gun to the older guy, Ronald. So here we are sitting on this curb, passing this gun back and forth, and no one wanting to take ownership. I'm frustrated, like, okay, y'all do it, I'm laughing, but like I'm like laughing at how ignorant it was for us to be playing these games with our life. But Marquise gave me the gun and said, you know what? Ian's not scared. I know Ian ain't scared. He got the heart of a lion. And so we made a pact, an agreement that the next people that we approach, that no matter if it was too open, no matter what, we had been downtown too long, the next people we approach, they were getting robbed. Okay, I agreed. So now the pressure's on me, the person with the gun, now that I agreed that no matter if it's too open or not, that a robbery was going to take place. So the older guy walked up to a couple leaning on a red car in a parking lot, literally right behind us. And I just remember hearing him say something like, do you have change for a 20? I was a few feet back, and I thought I heard him say yes. And I pulled out the gun and said, it's a jack. The lady screamed, immediately startled me. I fired. After that, everything just happened was a blur. More shots were fired, but nobody else was hit. We all turned around to run back to our neighborhood. Well, I turned around to run to go back to my neighborhood while they searched the male victim. The lady, Debbie, had ran across the street. And I remember Marquise catching up with me, and I turned around and I asked, how much did you get? How much did you get? And he replied, he didn't have anything, Jim. He didn't have anything. I threw the gun in some bushes and by a courthouse in downtown Tampa, and I ran back to the neighborhood. Later that night, what I found so intriguing, or I wouldn't say intriguing, what I found so peculiar was a police officer pulled up in my neighborhood, pointed to me, and told me to come to the car. I couldn't go home because it was past my 11 o'clock curfew, and my mother had a rule that if I stayed out past 11 o'clock, don't knock on her door. Go back where I came from till the morning. That was my punishment for violating her curfew rule. So it was after 11 o'clock by this time of night. And the police pointed to me and said, hey, you, come here. So I walked up to the side of the car and he says, hey, have you been in the park all night? I said, what park? The big park or the little park? He said, Central Park, which is my neighborhood name, the name of my neighborhood. I said, yeah, why? He said, because you fit the description of somebody that just took place in a shooting in downtown Tampa. I'm like, so I immediately turn around and I'm like, all these people out here with red and black on, you're going to pick me out of the whole Central Park? But what's like I said, what's peculiar is he was dead to the right. Like he had the right guy. And that's why I encourage people right now to this day. First of all, crime doesn't pay, but don't commit a crime in Tampa, Florida. You're going to jail, right? You're going to jail, possibly for a long time if it's a serious crime. But yeah, that's what happened that night, July 27th, 1990.
So you unknowingly turned yourself in pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
Walk me through that entire experience.
Ironically, I was arrested for a stolen car 3 days later. When I got to the police station, me and my friends, I was in the back seat of the police car, of the stolen car. I almost died that day because we jumped out of the stolen car and my foot got caught under the tire because I was in the back seat, and I jumped out the back door, and I had on a pair of Converse, Chuck Taylors, low cut, low top. I'll never forget. And when I jumped out the car, one of my feet got caught under the tire, and I'm going down. And I just remember like, no, I can't die like this. And I snatched my foot out of the tire. So we ended up getting arrested, all three of us, and I ended up in Tampa Police Station. And while I'm in the Tampa Police Station, I don't know what was wrong with me, man, but I seen that it was meant to be. I see the exact same police officer that pulled me over that pulled me to the side of his car that night and asked me if had I been in Central Park all night. I seen him and I called him to the holding cell and I said, hey, sir, did y'all ever catch that guy that committed that shooting in downtown Tampa? He said, I don't think that we did. I said, okay. It had been gnawing at my conscience because I didn't know that at that time. I didn't know until the police told me that someone had got shot. I didn't know when it actually happened that I had shot Debbie, because in my childlike mind, in the movies, when you shot somebody, they fell down. No one fell down that night. So I told the officer, and so my mother didn't come pick me up from the police station, so I ended up going to she couldn't come pick me up because I had a hold on me, and I ended up going to the detention center. And I just remember the officer constantly asking me about had I been involved in any other crimes, and for some reason, man, I went against the code of the streets. Not only are you not supposed to tell on anybody else, you're definitely not supposed to tell on yourself. But I had this big pressure on my chest, and I just wanted to get it out. And for some reason, it's difficult to even talk about now because there's still some trauma there. You know, I used to sit in my cell at night and think I brought all this on myself, literally. But anyway, we got to the detention center parking lot, the juvenile detention center parking lot, and I said, he said, "Is there anything else you want to tell me before we go into the detention center?" I'm like, "Yeah, actually it is. You know that lady that got shot downtown the other night?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "I'm the one that did it." That statement changed the trajectory of my life forever, because instead of just going to the detention center, doing 21 days for a grand theft auto, I wouldn't see the streets of society again for another 26 years. So that's how that confession went.
Do you think you would have eventually been caught if this didn't happen, or do you think they would have never found the guy?
They would have never found me. They would have never found me because there was no evidence tying me to the crime. Like, even after I was incarcerated and received all my discovery evidence, there was no evidence that the victim couldn't identify me. The guy lied and said he gave me money. I ended up with a life sentence for robbery that I didn't do because he said he gave me $3, which is what? I would have gave him the $3 back if that's all he had on him. Like, I never even touched the guy, you know? But to answer your question directly, no, I would have never been arrested.
So July 30th, 1990, you get charged. What were all the crimes that you were charged with, and what was the sentencing?
So I was charged with 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder for shooting Debbie and shooting at the man. And I was charged with armed robbery and attempted armed robbery. The armed robbery never happened. And I stand on that 32 years or 33 years later, however long it's been, 34 years later. The sentencing was life for the robbery, life for the attempted murder, 15 years for the attempted robbery, all running concurrent, and life probation for shooting at the man, which was the other attempted murder. And I'll never forget the judge's statement. He said, "And the life probation is being imposed." Matter of fact, I just remember I'll tell you his whole spiel. "Mr. Manuel, that was a statement made earlier today in this courtroom about giving you a second chance. However, sometimes there are no second chances. So I sentence you to life for the attempted murder. I sentence you to 15 years for the attempted robbery. I sentence you to life for the armed robbery. Those sentences ought to be ran concurrent. And I'm sentencing you to life probation for the other attempted murder consecutive. And I'm imposing this probation sentence in case the Department of Corrections should, for whatever reason, ever release you." Yeah, he tried to end my life. Literally, he tried to end my life. Yeah, that was a bitter pill to swallow. But I will say, at that time, I didn't comprehend what life without parole actually meant. I thought I'd be home in 25 years, 7 years. There was all type of rumors that a life sentence didn't really mean life. And I was young and I didn't know the legalities that I was facing. But before I got to the sentencing, my attorney, a guy by the name of Brian Gonzalez, manipulated me into pleading guilty. He told me if I pled guilty, I was going to get 15 years without um, any probation or anything like that. And I told him I didn't want to go to prison, period. And, I had heard all these horror stories about prison. So he went and got my mother, and my mother came over and convinced me to plead guilty because I thought about all the times that she had told me to do something and I did the opposite. And I ended up reaping the consequences of my decisions. So I'm like, man, my mother been to prison before. She's older than me. Maybe she knows what she's talking about. So I threw myself at the mercy of the court and entered an open plea of guilt, thinking I would get 15 years. And in turn, I was sentenced to life without parole.
What was prison like right at the beginning when you got there?
Prison was like punishment right when I got there because they placed me in solitary confinement my first day because of my age. Was I still 30? I had just turned 14. And they didn't put me in the general prison population initially. They put me in solitary confinement, which was painful to go through at that time, like because it wasn't something I was used to. However, then I was transferred to an adult prison and placed in open population after like a month at the reception center in solitary confinement. And, I was given all the responsibilities of an adult as a child. And I rebelled. I would do typical teenage behavior. Like the officers would yell at me. I'd yell back. They tell me to walk on the sidewalk. I walk in the grass. I'd be in unauthorized areas, places I wasn't supposed to be, in other dormitories. I get in fights. I just typical growing pains. However, when you do those growing pains inside of an adult facility, incarcerated, they punish you for it. So I was placed in like solitary confinement, given a lot of write-ups until they said I was a management problem and ended up placing me in long-term solitary confinement in November 1992. And I will remain in long-term solitary from November 1992 to November 2010, 18 consecutive years, from age 15 to age 33.
What did your cell look like in solitary?
Small 6x9 cell. Cells vary depending on what prison you was at, but I mostly spent a lot of my time in Florida State Prison, Union Correctional Institution, Martin CI. I was always at the worst of the worst prisons, right? But the cells were small, metal bunk, no mirror, a back window that was covered with plastic so you couldn't see out. You could only see the grass below you. There was a door in front of your cell with a rectangle window for you to look out. Depending on what shift was working, you couldn't talk. If you were caught talking, they would punish you by spraying you with high-powered chemical agents that got on your skin and burned like you were being roasted alive, that took your breath away. If they caught you looking at the female nurse when she came on the wing to pass out and distribute medication, they would gas you and put you on strip status. Strip status included a minimum of 72 hours, which is 3 days of no mattress, no sheets, no blankets, just you and your boxers for 3 days. being tortured by the winter and the elements, sleeping on the cold steel bunker or the floor of your cell. Yeah, man, I went through hell.
So, just taking a very objective standpoint, because obviously you did commit a crime, what should your sentencing have looked like?
So other states, for example, I think Illinois or Michigan was one. When I was growing up studying, like literally trying to study the law and reading about all these school shootings that was happening in the 90s in America, uh, or the Amy Fisher case and so many other cases that I used to like, well, why didn't they give me that opportunity? But anyway, like it was other states that had a law on the books that said they would sentence a child to the age of maturity. So for some that was 18, for some that was age 21, that you would be incarcerated until you reached the age of maturity and receive programming that help you develop your and rehabilitate yourself. I had to learn to rehabilitate myself. Prison doesn't rehabilitate you. So just the answer to your question, I think, to sentence me to if you're gonna put me in prison instead of a juvenile program or a juvenile prison, if you're gonna put me in adult prison, which I didn't think I deserved, but if you did, leave me there until the age of maturity. Don't throw me away completely and sentence me to life without parole, as if like I didn't kill anybody. So why were you literally trying to figuratively kill me and all of my dreams, hopes, and aspirations?
Yeah, so I mean, another fascinating thing getting things back into the solitary is that your development gets stripped even more by going into solitary as a teenager. What are the heightened risks for kids being put in solitary confinement?
You don't get to emotionally develop. Uh, you don't get the stimuli that you would, you're already lacking stimuli being in prison in comparison to society, but that is lessened even more by growing up in a cell. The only way I survived was I dived within the depths of my imagination and I started writing poetry. I started creating these beautiful, I taught myself how to write poetry. I'm in the process now of publishing a shopping around a poetry book that will have a lot of poems that the world has never seen before. I currently travel the country sharing my story to different colleges and universities and organizations. And the way people respond to my poetry, you would think Michael Jackson was on that stage. But I knew I could do that because I used to recite poetry to my fellow prisoners. And you take a population of men who have been abandoned, beaten, hurt, suffering depression, and if you can reach through all of that, cut through all that and touch them like I used to, then out here is a piece of cake. And my poetry saved my mind. My creativity saved my mind in that cell. I used to challenge myself. I used to rewrite Eminem. I rewrote Eminem's songs and Langston Hughes, Maya Angelou. I used to do all these things I didn't know I was doing them at the time, but in reflection, I realized I was actually trying to save my mind. I put my brain to sleep, and as I just found out in therapy, to numb myself against the insanity that surrounded me.
One of the most interesting reasons why I loved your story and your book so much is because I related to the poetry aspect of it. I mean, I haven't
Yes,
gone through anything like you have ever gone through, but I
right,
have been put into a time in my life where poetry really helped me. So
right.
the fact that you were put into this terrible situation and to see how poetry and creativity was the thing that got you through being put in solitary confinement is just super powerful to see.
Yeah, thank you. Harvard just purchased my archive of prison writings and poetry. And so it kind of validated that I was actually very good at what I did. And I want to share one of the first poems I wrote in solitary. It's called Genie in the Bottle. It says, I'm the genie in the bottle the world has forgot. They put me in this abyss and closed up the top. I was a little boy when they did what they did, but time continued to tick, and I'm no longer a kid. My mother is dead, and so is my father. I've been abandoned by family while trapped in this bottle. But I hold on to hope that someone will open the top, answer my prayers, and help me out. Sometimes people pick up the bottle and put their eye to the hole, but instead of compassion, acting different and cold. I suffer sensory deprivation, a lost sense of direction. There's no mirror in this bottle for me to see my reflection. They say being lonely and alone are two different definitions, but it's only me in this bottle, so I fit both descriptions. What I need is a friend, someone to extend a hand. It could be as simple as picking up a pen. Someone who cares, accepts me for who I am, my magnetic personality, and my baggage from the past. Someone who helps heal the sorrow, will work on building our tomorrow. Someone who refuses to leave me to die in this bottle. Thank you.
Do you remember how long into your sentencing that you wrote that?
Yeah, actually I do. I didn't start taking my poetry really, really, really seriously until around 2006. So I think I wrote that in 2006. So I got locked up in 90. So what is that, 16 years later?
One line that stood out to me there is that you say needing somebody to connect with you for who you truly are. How did Debbie Bakery, of all people, become that person for you?
Yeah, I made a phone call one day in early 1991, Christmas 1991. It was just weighing on me. Like I had confessed to this crime, but to me that wasn't enough. I had never spoken to the person that I hurt, and I wanted to clear my conscience and let her know that, I was sorry because I wasn't raised like that. That wasn't what my mother had or grandmother had instilled in me. And so I just got this wild idea. I lived in my head a lot that it could work. And so I found her phone number in the police reports that they give you. Everyone told me it was a crazy idea. The guys, the older convicts in the dorm were like, man, they're going to give you another charge for harassing the victim. Don't call that lady. I didn't listen. I picked up the phone and I called her, and she accepted the call. We talked for about 15 minutes. I don't remember a lot about the first conversation. It's up me starting the call with Miss Bakery. I'd like to wish you and your family a Merry Christmas and to apologize for shooting you in the face. And she asked me a question that no child should ever have to answer. She said, Ian, why did you shoot me? And I just remember my reply being, it all happened so fast, which it did. Like, and so I asked her, could I call back? She said yes. Call back. And I don't remember anything except the end of the conversation. And that's when I asked her, could I write her? And she said I could. And that's how our correspondence started.
So, did you start writing her before you started writing poetry?
Yes. 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 But I did. I had to think on that. The reason I had to think on that is because in the Starbucks documentary that they did on me and Debbie, there's some poetry that I sent Debbie. And I imagine that came later in the 90s. But even in the early 90s when I was writing and dabbling in poetry, when I say I didn't take it serious, I hadn't discovered that poetry was my gift yet. I didn't make that discovery until in the 2000s.
Something that I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on is because I'm a big believer that having times of solitude can be very important for building a strong relationship with ourselves and opening up our mind to new thoughts and ideas where we can just be in this environment where we're not talking with other people. Obviously, you were on one very extreme end of that where it was against your will for
Right,
an extended period of time. So if you're in that setting of solitude, it can become very destructive, especially as a young kid when you're not being, like you said, stimulated by other things and you can only rely on yourself in your mind.
right.
What I'd be curious to know though is how do you think being in solitary impacted your writing process?
Oh my God. Had I not been in solitary, I would not be the writer. The strength of my writing would not be as strong as it is. Um, Solitary allowed me to block out the distractions that people in society and people even in general prison population get caught up in. There's so much sports and whether if you're in society, there's your job and going back and forth to your job to raising your family. And an open population, there's the fights and the lovers and the officers. It's just too many distractions. Being in solitary confinement, I felt like a Buddhist monk. I was totally away from all the bullshit in society or open population. And I could just dive within the depth of my consciousness where I could reflect back what I was feeling, you know? Um, I as much as I hate solitary confinement, I don't regret those 18 years I spent in solitary because I was able to create some beautiful, beautiful art, valuable art, and discover the gift that the universe had gave me. Um, and even now, I can call on it. I mean, I get caught up out here when money is a huge distraction sometimes, and I use money sometimes as a way to self medicate. Whether it's gambling or whatever, and I run through a lot of money fast, man. And when I don't have a lot of money and I'm not traveling and here and there, and I'm just sitting in my apartment with my thoughts, as I have been the past couple weeks, I create some beautiful, beautiful art. So the world is in for a treat. I'm currently shopping around, like I said, my poetry book, and it's gonna be some beautiful, beautiful poetry. And I just wrote a poem dedicated to God. I don't want to share that now
Save it
because
for
it
the
isn't
book.
published. But I think the world will be quite impressed with this voice that I discovered during some difficult times.
So do you feel like for your writing process, now that you're out of jail, you have to recreate that solitary environment to have the same
Oh
effect for
man,
your
I
writing?
hope not, but it does seem like I self-sabotage sometimes to get to that point. I wish I knew how to just, hey, you know what? Let me book a retreat and go to some quiet place in the Poconos or something and find that without having to self-sabotage unconsciously uh myself to create this beautiful art. But I think I only been out. November will be 8 years I've been out. I think I got out in 16. I think November will be 8 years. So I haven't been out a full 10 years yet. So I'm still on a self-discovery phase, like learning what works, what doesn't work, learning myself, self-reflection therapy. Um, so I guess I guess the answer is I'm trying to get to a point where I don't have to create this self-sabotage chaos for me to like create this beautiful art.
Yeah, that's really well said. So poetry was obviously something that you used to express yourself mentally and emotionally. Talk to me about the relationship though between being physically abused and not being able to show emotion and the effect that it had on you in prison.
Yeah, it had a huge effect on me, man. Because I've been through trauma therapy since I've been out, and I went through this intense trauma program at in Arizona, where it was 12 hours of therapy, 7 days a week, from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. All type of therapy, equine therapy with horses, psychodrama therapy, individual therapy, group therapy, EMD therapy. It was very intense, and some things came up during those therapy sessions, things that I thought I had dealt with, but I hadn't. I had only pushed them down to numb myself because I couldn't express pain and sadness in a way in prison that would be acceptable to my peers or the staff. Because in prison, if you show signs of weakness or sadness, not only do you get ridiculed by your fellow prisoners, but the staff will take advantage of you. So you have to wear this mask of impenetrable of impregnable defense system against sadness and against showing emotions. Um, I wish I could have showed more emotions in prison because maybe I wouldn't have harbored so much. But I tell you this, I was able to cry through my pen. My poetry was therapeutic and cathartic. That's how I got it out. That's exactly how I got it out.
So how many years into your prison sentence did you get the letter from Brian Stevenson from Equal Justice Initiative?
Right when I started taking poetry serious in 2006. Yeah,
That
so
so how many years
yeah.
into that sentence was it then?
Say that again.
How many years into your sentence was it then?
16. I think that was 16 years.
And what was it about your case specifically that EJI thought they could help?
I believe EJI were looking for the youngest of the youngest that they could find who had committed a non-homicide crime to challenge life without parole sentences for juveniles. And when they looked throughout the whole United States, they were only able to find two people and that were 13 when their crime happened and who had been sentenced to life for a non-homicide crime. And so they finally, after years of people overlooking my case because it wasn't the right fit, it was the perfect fit for what EJI wanted to do with me.
You thought you were going to be released in 2011, but then were sent back to prison. Talk me through everything that happened there.
Yeah, it was a 65-year sentence. I'll never forget the judge. My one of my attorneys who works for Brian was asking for time served, and the judge, I remember him saying and like have leniency on me. My lawyer was asking for leniency, and the judge said something I'll never forget. He was like, You know, everybody's in my courtroom talking about rehabilitation. However, in 1990, the legislative intent was to punish, not rehabilitate. When he said those words, I knew I wasn't going home that day. So he went in his chambers to deliberate, twiddle his thumbs or whatever he was doing back there. And he came back out like 30 minutes later, nullified my life sentences, and in place gave me 65 years in prison. So I was sent back to prison, finally given a release date, but my release date was 2031, 32. I'm like, man, and this is 2011. I'm like, man, I can't win for losing, man. Like, what more do you want? You know? But everything happens for a reason, man. In retrospect, things were aligning in my favor for me to come home to be successful. Had I got out all those other years when I wanted to get out, I don't think that I would have been as successful as I have been now.
Mr. Manuel sort of defies what the prediction might be for someone who has been in isolation for that long because he has responded so well. Obviously, you've written a lot of poetry, which has helped you, but I would say the vast majority, if not everyone who was put into that situation and they were told just write poetry for 18 years and you'll be able to get through this, I don't think a single person would be able to endure that.
Yes, sir.
Why do you think you were able to get through everything that you went through?
I believe in a higher power, man. I believe I manifested Brian Stevenson. I believe I have a purpose to fulfill in this world. I think, you know, if you look at the Holy Scriptures, whether it's the Quran or the Bible, it's like God picks the most unlikely people to be the heroes. Whether it was David to become king, or whether it was Joseph, who I really like in the Bible. One of my favorite stories in the Bible is about Joseph. I think I'm not one of those unlikely characters that God has this huge purpose for. And I don't think it's finished. I don't think it was just me going to prison and getting out. And I think it's more. I think I was meant to impact humanity in a way that it hasn't been impacted before. They're currently in works to do a documentary about my life. There's a talks. I did a one-man poetry show already, but there's talk about like exposing that to a broader audience. A one-man show on Broadway. I just think, man, I was meant what man meant for bad, God meant for good when it came to Ian Manuel's life.
What did your plan look like for re-entry into the real world right before you got released? Was there something lined up that you had programmed with
No, I
DJI?
had a very childlike, only thing I wanted to do was write a book. I wanted to write a book. Other than that, I just wanted to eat, man. I wanted to make up for 26 years of just trash food. I wanted to devour everything. I remember having this fantasy of pizza with shrimp topping. I wanted, and because I had never like had that. Like I only had pepperoni. I don't eat pepperoni anymore because it's pork. But I just had these ideas of what freedom felt and tastes like, and to me, a pizza with shrimp topping was the epitome of freedom. So I didn't have any reentry plans. In that sense, I know I did want to travel the country, which I'm currently doing, just not as broadly as I want. I did want to, like I told the judge at my final resentencing, when he said, Mr. Matt, when he knew I was going home and I knew I was going home, the judge asked me, Mr. Manuel, what are you going to do with your life? I said, I'm going to go out here and I'm going to tell my story. And if I could touch one person and convince them to change and deter them from committing crimes, then all of this would not have been in vain. Since I've been out, man, I got so many letters, emails, DMs, texts telling me how inspirational my story is and how moved they are to either get involved with the criminal justice system and change it, or to change their ways and not commit crimes. So I've more than lived up to my promise to that judge. So if there was any particular reentry thing I wanted besides that pizza with shrimp topping, it was to impact the world and change the way people view people who look like me with similar experiences.
How important was it having Debbie with you on the day you got released?
Oh, that was like a dream come true. That was like something straight out of a movie. Like I remember getting out of the car and my lawyer, my social worker, and Debbie we met at like a gas station, and I just remember finally getting to do what I had like imagined and manifested so many years in prison. I hugged Debbie and I kissed her on both sides of her cheek because I didn't know which side the bullet had went in. And I felt like that was like completion for me. Like I had made up. If I know that's like kind of like crazy to think, but it's also crazy to think that you could actually kiss somebody that you shot. And I got that opportunity, man. So it was so real. It was like an out of body experience, man, to live that, man. That night, that day, November, I think 10th, 2016, man, it's like winning the lottery. It's like escaping a burning building with your life. It's like, man, it's a feeling that I wish that everybody could feel at least once in their life, just being successful and having a dream, an impossible dream come true. Oh my God, I gotta write that down. An impossible dream come true.
I love how you're writing that down right now because, if you don't, you're going to forget it.
Yeah,
Getting back
facts.
to the aura component that we were talking about, how people say you have this aura to you that they like. And I
Yes,
think just from talking with you, based on what you just said, I think you just have this very deeply ingrained appreciation for life that
yes,
not a lot of people have experienced, because there aren't a lot of people who have experienced what you have gone through and how you've overcome it. And I think you also just have this young and pure energy to you, especially
yeah,
for somebody your age.
yeah,
And that's another fascinating thing that I'd love to hear you talk about, is how I've heard you say how you're a 40-year-old man physically, but on the mental, emotional, and developmental side, and just living within society, because you were cut off from society for such a long time, you are a teenager to a certain extent still. How do
yeah.
you grapple with all that?
It's difficult because it impacts my relationships. People expect me to behave in ways that a 47-year-old man will behave. I mean, and I'm not like wild or anything like that. It's just that I don't have the experience of how to navigate relationships properly on a personal level. On a professional level, it's like I've been doing this all my life, right? Because I'm a performer. That comes natural. Um, but on a personal level, I struggle with relationships sometimes because with relationships, you have to let people get close to you. And that doesn't feel good sometimes, just from childhood trauma. Um, yeah, I have a lot of mental and emotional development to do, especially in the emotional intelligence department. That's something that I'm deficient in. And I blame that on solitary confinement. So on one sense, solitary confinement helped me with my creativity, but on the other end, it kind of stunted my growth in many areas that I needed to develop. It's an everyday process, and I'm willing to put in the work to get better at it.
Because you were in isolation for such a massive part of your life, being outside of prison now, are you in your most comfortable, natural state when you're alone, do you feel like?
Yes, absolutely. I love it. I love it. Like I hear people, especially I know you remember during the COVID era where everyone had to be in the house and people were losing their minds. Man, I was in my element. I was in my zone. I'm like, yes, like, man, this is where it's at, man. I was so happy, man. Yeah, working from home, and man, like COVID really changed the world for the better in my eyes. I know people lost their lives and I'm sorry about that. And my heart goes out to those victims. But in a sense, it kind of restructured the societal mentality of how things had to work. Instead of, I have to meet you at your office for every one of these meetings. No, we can do this over Zoom. You know what I'm saying? It just became, I did a whole book tour on Zoom. And it was so much better because I would have had to fly to 15 different states to sell a few copies of books. And man, in each state, like it just makes no sense. I love the COVID era. So yes, I'm in my best element. You hear how excited I got when you asked me that question, right? I love being alone, man. And that's just because I spent so much time by myself.
We need to speak about harm, what we've done, what's been done to us, because that is what will open doors, what will air out and begin to heal the wounds we carry and have caused. And that is what will allow for new stories to begin to be told. What's the new story that you want to tell?
Let me think on that. I think the new story I want to tell is the one of what happens after prison, the reentry process and what it looked like for me versus what it looks like for others. I want to tell the story of improbability of, people think miracles stop happening in the biblical age. And I know my story is nothing short of a miracle. Like having Brian Stevenson write me a letter and take my case for free, it's like winning the lottery. Like that just doesn't happen like that. Having the U.S. Supreme Court in a 5-4 decision overturn all juvenile life sentences and giving me an opportunity not to die in prison was a miracle. Meeting Jeff Bezos and having Jeff Bezos give me the advice of, this is going to be in my poetry book, that maybe you need to focus on lyric writing instead of just poetry, because from a business standpoint, poetry really doesn't sell that well, Ian. At first, I took it as criticism because everyone else, all the celebrities were telling me, and by celebrities, I mean Lucy Liu, Rita Ora, Allison Felix, Brian. Everyone was telling me how remarkable my poetry was and how moved they were by it. And here's Jeff thinking from a business standpoint, like, yeah, everybody's feeling this, but there's not really any money in poetry, right? And giving me the advice that, hey, man, you transform that poetry into lyrics and make your money that way. Just the miracle that my life is. I think that's the new story that I want to tell, how miracles are still possible in this day and age.
That's what I love most about your poem, If I Told My Story, the final line, that I lived a miraculous life.
Yeah.
The fact that you used miraculous there instead of something like challenging or difficult or unfair
Yeah.
just shows the type of mindset that you've had with everything that you've dealt with and will continue to do with your future.
Yes, sir.
Ian, where can people go to connect with you and support you?
Thank you. People could connect with me at Ian Manuel Official on Instagram. People could connect with me on Twitter, where I think I'm Ian Manuel Official as well. Um, yeah, that's the best two places to find me.
Ian, I really appreciate you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Tim. It's been my pleasure.